Welcome to Inside Ogden. I'm your host, Doug Jardine, along with your mayor, Matthew Godfrey, for another couple of months anyway. And you say It's kind of exciting.
Yeah, it is exciting for me.
What are you
going
to do?
You, I'm sure.
What are you going to do January 1 anyway? Any thoughts? Any
private sector? Yeah, looking forward to getting out of the public life, and it's been a great experience, and I've enjoyed it. But looking forward to doing something in the private sector.
I think after the football games on January 1st, 2nd, 3rd, wait, now they go till the 15th, but you'll probably drive by downtown and just on a Tuesday night say, I think I'll just go in and sit through a city council meeting.
That's probably not going to happen. Yeah.
But it's been a good run, and I can tell over the since you made your decision, really, there's kind of just been a more relaxed feeling around you ever since.
Getting there. Last night I still dreamed all night long about city projects and things we're working on, and it'll be nice when that stops, when this doesn't consume my life 24 hours a day. But it's feeling less and less consuming as time goes on.
And I know your wife is pretty happy about your decision and the decision that you obviously made together.
Yeah, she is. We both stayed in this way longer than we ever thought we would, and we're excited to transition to the next phase of our lives.
And by the next time you and I meet here, we'll have an elected mayor, and you will be the proverbial lame duck.
Yeah, as though I'm not already that lame duck.
But two great candidates, so at the very least get out and vote, because they have worked extremely hard for your votes, not only on the mayoral side, but city council as well. There are a lot of good people out there, and I think there's a renewed interest in the general public of wanting to take part in city government and do things that help make Ogden move forward, and we've seen that through this whole political season.
Yeah, the things that touch our lives the most politically happen at a local level. So we get far more media coverage for the big national races, and for good reason. There are important issues clearly at stake there, but the day-to-day things happen on a local level, so it is critical that we get to know the candidates that are running and make sure that we're picking the best people.
Do you remember what you spent on your last campaign as President Obama gets ready to spend $1 billion on re-election?
Yeah, I mean, nowhere near that, obviously.
Oh, I know, but just in relative importance, as you say, it's the local level that touches everyone. The national level gets all the exposure, but the amount of money is incredible on that side, but so much better spent on the local level.
Yeah, for sure. It's local races cost a lot less, and it's a shame they cost as much as they do. I mean, these candidates are going to spend between them well over $100,000, probably closer to $150,000 in the final two in the mayoral race, and that's way too much money. And I spent much more than that when I ran the last time. And it shouldn't be that way. We should be able to run a great campaign for a lot less money, but this is the world we live in today.
Well, enough of that. Let's get on to some issues that we come here to talk about every single time, but kind of a fun one to talk about. 10 days ago, 2 weeks ago, you and I were over at the 4th Street Park, and we brought in two national companies to give Ogden a new look play space, the Hershey Company as well as Nike. Mm-hmm. That was a nice, I mean, you go there and you got a space that's 15 yards by 20 yards, but it really is significant in the overall importance to what it stands for.
Yeah, it cleans up that park. That is an old park and a very well-used park, and so having something new there for the kids while the parents are watching their spouses or kids play games is going to be really neat. But the facility itself, like you're alluding to, is really amazing. It's the first of its kind in the world, and it's what it is recycled shoes from Nike that makes up this playground. It's a mini track with slides and other features, and then it has these lights within the playground surface itself that you can play games on. And there's 15 or so different games that you can play by running around and stepping on these lights that are around this play space. And so the kids had a great time, a beautiful addition. And it was free. Between Nike and Hershey's and Play Space Design, I guess, it was donated to the city to show what products are out there, and so we're immensely grateful to Nike and Hershey for doing this for our community.
And I can't remember the woman's name who's really spearheaded the movement and oversees local Hershey track and field. You'll remember her.
Lydia Barton.
Yeah. What a great honor for her. I mean, she wasn't there to be honored, but it was almost like, you've done all this work your entire life bringing exercise through track and field to so many young people. the little track play space should almost be named after her or something.
It really should. I mean, she called me and said, hey, if I could get you a free playground, would you have a place where we could put it, a park where we could put it? It's like, well, I'm sure we can find something for you. And she's acted the whole time like we've done her this great favor, when obviously it's just the opposite. So she went after this grant. We got the grant because of how the track program, in part because of how she and others in the state have grown Hershey's track and field in the last several years. So their work made it so that we were the shining star, and then her grant application located it here in Ogden. So Lydia Barton, we thank you and the others that worked with you to help make this happen and get this great playground for free for our community.
Yeah, that was great. Thanks to everybody for their work on that. Good news, HomeDepot.com is in town now.
Yeah, we're building a new building for Home Depot. We've been working on this one for a long time. They're consolidating a different centers from around the country here to Ogden because it's lower cost, and we've promised a better quality workforce, which we're confident will deliver. So there'll be.
Is this only internet sales?
Yeah, it's the customer service center. So it's all the back end operations for HomeDepot.com, and it's going to be a new building out at BDO. They'll be hiring about 700 people. We believe that we're going to get some future pieces of that business as well. Before it's all said and done, we anticipate we'll have about 1,000 jobs from Home Depot.
Oh, that's amazing, and another great job announcement there. So, and then there's this is going to take a while, so I'm going to ask a question, then I'm going to sit back in my chair and cross my legs and listen to what you're going to do. But there's been a lot of talk about streetcars in Ogden, what it was going to cost, the revamp numbers that have been thrown around, budgets, this and that. So, Mayor, I know you've got some things you want to show, so why don't you just go right ahead and do it?
Great, thank you. Well, we'll put up on the screen some PowerPoint presentations and go through them and tell you what's happened. On September 8th, I met with several people from UTA. I had heard rumors that they had a way to fund the streetcar proposal, and so I asked them to come and share with me what their new ideas were and how they thought they could make it happen, because clearly the current proposal at $160 million and $3.5 million a year to operate is way outside our world of possibilities. And so they came in and shared this with us. So the new funding scenario has a bunch of changes and assumptions. The first change is that the capital costs will drop from $160 million to $125 million, which is a 28% decrease. Operating costs, they are projecting, will decline or need to decline from $3.5 million to $2.7 million, which is a 30% decrease. They're also assuming that there'll be a 70% federal match, which is much higher than what is happening around the country right now. There's only about a 50% federal match that we're seeing. It also, part of that match includes $10 million for a downtown circulator that would have to be built first. There is also the assumption of a 44% fare box recovery, up from 14%. So let me explain that. That's the money that you pay when you get on the bus, or in this case, the trolley. So as you get on and you pay for that service, across UTA's network along the Wasatch Front, they collect 14% of their total expenses for operating the system. 14% is covered by fare box revenues. In this analysis, they're now assuming, their base assumption is that they'll get 44%, which is a significant increase. All right, let's go to capital costs. So when they brought this out, we asked them how they assumed why they assumed the price would decrease from $160 million down to $125 million. There was no detail at all provided as to why that would happen. So throughout this meeting, it became clear that these were kind of the numbers that would have to be there in order for it to work. But they have no idea how they're going to drop it from 160 to 125. The one thing they did mention was that if in the consultant's plan they had built platforms to step off onto rather than stepping off onto the curb. So if you've been to tracks in Salt Lake, when you get off of tracks in downtown, there's these nice platforms that are very beautiful and nice, and they're raised up a little bit. They're saying we could eliminate those and just step down onto the existing curb and cut some of those costs. My belief is that those are already cut out of the system, because we had talked about that with the consultants and said, yeah, we can just use existing curb lines. So I'm not sure those costs are even in the project. But if they are, there would be, according to my count, a total of 9 places in the proposal where you wouldn't build a platform and be able to step out onto the existing curb. That is not a huge ticket item.
Not $65 million worth.
Yeah. The 35 million delta between 125 and 160 certainly cannot be covered by making that one change. And then asked why, if there are other things, and they really didn't know. They didn't know how. They're just saying we have to accept the cost. Now, just to be clear, the 160 was not a number they pulled out of the air. In fact, when we went into this, the target was 125. Which was $25 million higher than we started with. When we entered the project, it was supposed to be around $100 million. But after they had analyzed it for some time initially, they said we think it's going to be closer to 125. They put, the consulting company who did this, that UTA hired, said of all of the consulting they've done around the country, they put far more detail into this one than they'd ever done before. The level of engineering detail was far superior to anyone that any team member could recognize. So they said, at the end, they said, we're very confident about our numbers because of the detail that we've gone through in compiling this analysis. So it isn't like it was a swag. They just, were saying it's in this range, they said, and their exact number was, right under $157 million was their price tag. But that didn't include some things like substation upgrades. It didn't include a maintenance warehouse for the streetcars and those kinds of things, which they estimated would be about $3 to $5 million. So anyway, just so everybody knows, the capital costs, it's just a number they kind of pulled out, saying, we need to reduce that by $35 million. They don't know how they would actually make that happen. Operating costs. They did have a plan for this, and their plan was to change the level of service from, I think in the proposal it was 15-minute headway, so every 15 minutes during the peak hours there was a streetcar coming, and moving that to 20 minutes. So that's a 25% decrease in the number of trains that are coming by. But my concern was, well, you've decreased your headway by 25%, or the frequency, which is personnel costs. That's the number of people that are running it, which is a very high component in the total labor. But how are you going to get the rest of that 30%? That wouldn't account for, it's not linear by any means, because most of the cost is in the infrastructure, having the vehicles, the maintenance of the vehicles. Just the basic overhead is the main driver. The labor is a significant component, but once again, it wouldn't be, if you decrease the headways by 30%, you wouldn't see a 30% decrease in cost. It would be, maybe half of that. So not all the detail. They did have, at least something to explain why their assumptions would go down, but certainly it's not enough to decrease it. The other concern that I had with that assumption was there was no analysis as to how that would affect ridership. So clearly, as you decrease the frequency, when the train is not coming by as often, you're going to have fewer riders, because some people, if they deem it too slow, are going to choose other ways of getting to work. And that's well established. That's not an assumption. That's the way these formulas work.
Or they don't want to be a bunch of sardines on the same car either, pushed in with a lot of other people.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So the more frequency you have, the more riders you have. So by decreasing this ridership number, it would affect all the other numbers and assumption in their plan, and they acknowledged that that was the case, but hadn't done any analysis to say it's going to drop our ridership by this number, which would in turn drop the probability that this project would even be funded, and would certainly drop the funding amount available.
On the riders, before you go further, if I could, isn't the operating cost and the decrease in the number of trains, that's really impactful for students at Weber State, is it not?
Yeah, this...
or maybe I want to make sure...
you're absolutely right.
Okay.
And this system really is for students. When you look at the numbers, there are very few that are going anywhere but Weber State. So this streetcar system, there was a handful of riders in the inner city, A little more than a handful of riders that were going to McKay-D, but completely insignificant when you compared it to, students going to Weber State.
And so if you cut back the frequency of trolleys, kids are going to be late for class. Or
Yeah,
do they have
or-
to? They either have to leave a lot earlier or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it has that effect, and so you will see more students driving and
more
parking
driving.
at McKay-D or parking at the D Event Center, as opposed to using this. Okay, so you get now to the federal match page. So on this one, the match, as I mentioned earlier, went from 50% federal funding, 50% local, which is what's happening today with these grants. They become more competitive, and obviously as the federal government is now struggling to figure out how they can fund all these programs, they've been cutting back, and things have been increasingly competitive for federal dollars. So the reality is it's 50% is what we've seen, and so their assumption here is that it would actually go up, that we would get 70% federal money and only use 30% of local funding. Don't know how that's going to happen. Once again, that's going exactly in the opposite direction of what's actually occurring. The other assumption was $10 million in what is called Tiger funding to build a downtown circulator first, which is something we've talked about on the show many times. And then we've been running a rubber-tired bus that looks like a streetcar to try to see what kind of numbers we can justify and if there really is a market for a downtown circulator. And those numbers have been turned over to UTA and Wasatch Front Regional Council for them to do their analysis and tell us if they think it can compete on a national level for a downtown circulator. The initial comment by UTA was that the numbers did not look good, but we'll wait until they do their final analysis. So that would also require then, even with that $10 million to build the downtown circulator first, it would require 60% funding for the remainder of the system through what's called the New Starts grant, which will really be pushing the envelope. The other thing that I didn't talk to them about, but I realized after, is that they're assuming that we can use that first $10 million of federal grant for the downtown circulator as match for the other, which does not qualify. So I need to talk to them further. You can't use federal match as your local match. You have to come up with your own funding. And so they're off in their numbers, and I need to better understand how they plan to make that work. So that's a huge assumption, because their federal match dollars significantly decrease the local funding, which is what it's really all about. Okay, fare box revenue, again, we talked about what fare box means. So they're assuming $21.2 million in fare box revenue over the life of the 20-year life of the project, which is kind of the funding cycle, that's a really big number. So I've talked about some of these concerns now, moving to the next page about their assumption. Once again, there's no factual basis for lowering the capital cost. There seems to be a number that was pulled out to make it work. Once again, lowering frequency of service by 25% will not lower cost of operations by 30%, not even close. So there will have to be other things identified to lower those operating costs. I mentioned lower frequency will lower ridership and thereby will lower the fare box revenue and lower the potential federal match percentage, and that has not been quantified. The downtown circulator will be difficult because, according to UTA, our trolley ridership numbers are low. On the next page, the route supported by the City Council is actually more expensive than the route that we've been talking about. The council has said that they would not be supportive of any route that does not go up 25th Street to Harrison, then Harrison to the university. And throughout all of the analysis, and there was considerable time.
Right up 25th Street.
Right up 25th Street from downtown all the
Starting
way
at the
to
River
Harrison.
End.
So there were different routes where it came over onto 25th Street. Mm-hmm. Most of them were coming over at Lincoln. Mm-hmm. And 25th, and then from Lincoln straight up 25th Street to Harrison. And the challenge is more when you hit Harrison, because that road is already congested during the peak hours. It's really, really busy. To introduce now a streetcar into that corridor is going to cause major traffic problems, which UDOT is not willing to accept. They're saying there's no way we can have this interrupt the flow that's already kind of at capacity.
Not a lot of room to widen to make room for it either.
Exactly, and the council said they don't want it widened, and so you're in a conundrum. You know, and You know, there's some very passionate people in the community saying that they're confident that it can fit in there, not disrupt traffic, and not be widened. And every engineer that's looked at this, traffic engineer, has said that's just not possible. You know, they've looked at all the different scenarios, suggestions that have come up, and their analysis has been, you can't do it. You know, there are physics to this, and you know, laws of math that you have to abide by, and you can't introduce something new into that corridor and not have it affect those that are already there. So the only way you can make it happen is if you do widen and take more right-of-way, which would cost a lot more money, or do something really fancy in some way that nobody's contemplated yet. You know, raising the streetcar. I don't know what you would do, but
either way,
with money you can solve any problem,
yeah,
but it's going to cost more money. So that is not contemplated either. So you're talking about going from $160 million to who knows what additional money would be needed, but it would likely be tens of millions of dollars more. I think it's important to understand that Weber State would need to contribute an additional over $1 million. I put 1.2 here, but it's some number north of $1 million a year to their EcoPass program in order to pay for the operational costs. So when we talked about farebox revenue increasing significantly, and you look at the numbers and who are the riders aren't you know, handing cash to the drivers when they get on the bus, because the vast majority of these riders are Weber State students, and they ride free because of this EcoPass. So the only way UTA can hit their numbers in their projection is to dramatically increase what they charge for their EcoPass to Weber State. And so for that to happen and to meet the pro forma, Weber State would have to pay more than $1 million a year in additional, so beyond what they're currently paying, for their EcoPass to hit the numbers. And so that's not been contributed, not been included or discussed much. And I think the students and the faculty and all of them need to be aware that for this proposal to happen, they're going to have to ante up a lot of money. Moreover, that number has to increase by $50,000 a year to meet the numbers. Okay, the next challenge is, even at all of these lower numbers and the assumptions that are baked into this, there still is a requirement for just under $80 million over the next 20 years of local funding to make this happen. I simply do not believe that money exists. And having talked to the person at Weber County who's over the funding, there is a 1/4 cent sales tax that's there. Doug Larson is in charge of that. I asked him what is available for this project. And he gave me the following slide, which is quite complicated. But basically he said, there is no money available currently for transit. That all of this latest 1/4 cent that was approved back in 2007 has to go toward roads in order to meet what was approved by the Weber Area Council of Governments. I have a different recollection. I was in that meeting, I voted on that, and I told Doug that my recollection of that motion was very different from what he has. He is adamant that he's gone through the minutes, he's listened to everything, he's interviewed the commissioners and others, and that he's confident that what he has here is correct. And it's just different than what I remember. I believe that there should be some money there for transit, but he's saying there is none available for any kind of transit right now. He's saying that it would take an increase of taxes, that we would have to increase our sales tax by a 1/4 cent in order for us to have money available for transit and for this project. And that's what these 3 slides are saying, is that until you get to that 4th 1/4 cent, there's no additional funding for a streetcar. And actually the 4th 1/4 cent would provide, let's see, is it on the next page? No, but as I did the calculation, it would take that 4th 1/4 in order to provide the funding that the UTA is assuming is in place, which I think is a big problem. I don't think this is an environment where, one, elected officials are going to put on the ballot a 1/4 cent. I don't think the legislature was going to make that available. Then there's no way voters are going to vote for it. In this climate, And for the foreseeable future, there's zero chance of this community passing an additional tax on themselves. I think the other political challenge is, why would they, when the analysis done by the consultants is saying this is for Weber State students, that's who's going to be using this system. So why would we opt to tax ourselves additional money so that students can ride a train instead of a bus from the intermodal hub to Weber State campus? I just think that's a really hard sell for voters. So, in conclusion, if we were to look at this and say, okay, what are the next steps? First of all, I think we need to validate the assumptions. It's pretty clear that these numbers were just chosen. I think UTA would need to go and show us how they would actually lower the cost, both of construction and operating this thing. We need to figure out how we get a local match, and we need to see how we're going to do with a circulator in downtown. So we need to look at those numbers and see, is it really possible for us to get a downtown circulator? Finally, or not finally, but do we qualify for new starts given these new assumptions? So with the frequency decreasing to 20 minutes, do we still have the ridership to justify the federal grant? Is something that needs to be examined. And then, is Weber State willing to pay some number north of $1 million a year and 50 grand increased per year in order to pay for the operations of this system? And finally, what's the alignment? We haven't even really settled that question at all. And if we can't do the least expensive alternative, which is what's being studied here, how would we ever come up with more money to do a different alignment? I just think there are a lot of very complicated issues. Even with the assumptions that they've put into place, I don't see any way it can still be funded. And I think their assumptions are pretty optimistic in terms of what's really possible. So a challenging project, to say the least.
And so were you to remain as mayor, you would suggest status quo?
Yeah, I think what makes sense is that we have a 603 that goes right from the intermodal hub up to Weber State University. What makes sense to me is that bus service be increased. And I think we could accommodate Weber State's growth plans and what they want to do with that 603 bus. And it would be a fraction of the cost of doing this other system.
Sounds like a good reality show, Weber 603. You worked in 90210 for a while.
Yeah.
The timeline for any decision, or at least the very next meeting, is what?
Well, there is no timeline. So this information is out there, and honestly,
waiting for UTA to recrunch numbers and
yeah, I'm not sure. It seems like there's kind of a standoff now. Everybody's looking at each other. There's a desire by several members of the council to continue studying this, which I just have a hard time seeing how that makes sense. If there's not money to do it, which clearly there's not, why would we? And the council even agreed in the last meeting. There's the chair, Godfrey, who said, let's study doing more increased bus service. And that was almost everybody seemed to say, yeah, that's the only thing in this that makes sense. I talked to an urban planner who's well respected and said, kind of went over this whole concept of streetcar. And they said they're typically advising communities to build streetcars, but they said they think it's absolutely the wrong decision for our community. He says, you're not big enough. They said, you are 20 to 30 years away from being big enough to justify a streetcar. Yeah, and he says, this is the first time I've ever given that advice, because normally they're consulting much bigger municipalities, but he said, you don't have the density, you don't have the traffic congestion, the factors that a city needs to implement streetcar, you don't have. And so you need to wait a while. You need to grow up a little more, and you'll get to the point where you're ready for a streetcar.
So whether or not the streetcar was what might be wanted or needed in the downtown area up to Weber State, you need to expand further out in the residential areas to make, with the population density increase, to make it worth the money.
Yeah.
Bring folks from Draper, Sandy to Salt Lake City, bring folks all the way from North Ogden, South Ogden into the center of the city before this is feasible?
Yeah, I think his message was, Your roads have to be a lot more congested for this to make sense economically for your community. You have to have more jobs in downtown. There has to be a real population shift where you have this dense urban environment that people are trying to get in and out of. And until you're there, this kind of an investment doesn't make sense. You don't have parking issues. You don't have traffic issues. He said the factors that justify this kind of an investment aren't here for your community yet. So it is a great idea, and I think we'll get there at some point, but timing's important, and this just doesn't seem like the right time to be doing something like this.
Well, we had several other things to talk about. Let's just throw out one fun thing, and then we have to go because we are kind of out of time. But Lance Armstrong's coming to Ogden.
Came to Ogden.
Came to Ogden for Xterra.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Xterra was last month, and the newspaper broke it. But he started doing triathlons when he was a teenager, and then was very, very good, by the way, but then focused on cycling for his career. So Xterra, I understand it, is the first triathlon he's done since he was a teenager, and did extremely well. I mean, he and I'm sure many of his fans may have been disappointed because he didn't win, but Xterra is a very, very difficult race. It is extremely grueling, and it takes a very special kind of athlete to be able to perform at a high level. And he was 5th overall, which is amazing. He was right with the leaders the whole way. I think the length of it and the intensity of every component of it, the run and the bike especially, were more than he was anticipating. But it was great to have him in town. What a great coup for us.
Yeah, and then after he was done, we put him in the basement, and he kept the city's electric power going for a while.
He certainly could. He's amazing.
That's one of the best commercials I've seen in a long, long time. And then I want to there's other things happening, but with the completion of the river project, and we were out there several weeks back as well to say, hey, come down and look. But now there's a new park there as well. So talk about that, and then we'll say goodbye.
If you've not seen the new park in the river project, you should go to it. The design of that is to be a regional park. It has unique pieces of equipment that you won't see anywhere else along the Wasatch Front, and it's only halfway done. We're going to be more than doubling the size of that playground in the park area here in the next several months. So we just got the piece done that we could at this point, and we'll get the others done as soon as we can. But it is an incredible park area. So it's right between Lincoln and Grant Avenue on 18th Street. So you need to go down, and I can't describe it to you, but the city put a lot of money into that, as did RAMP. We got a RAMP grant to help make that happen. So go take your kids to it, and I think you'll be very impressed.
And I know we're coming up now on the holiday season, and gosh, we hope you have a great holiday season. I'm not exactly sure when we'll schedule our next show together here, but I'll tell you to have a happy Thanksgiving and holiday season, and Mayor, I'll let you do that before we go away as well. And then if you have any questions for the Mayor, please don't ever be afraid to email him. We'd love to answer your questions here. It's easy enough, mayor@ogdencity.com. Send him a question, and we'll answer it on this show. But happy Thanksgiving and holiday season from the host, and Mayor, I'll let you say the same thing, and then you can sign off today.
Yeah, I don't know that we will be here before Thanksgiving.
We might not, yeah.
So I hope you have a great Thanksgiving and spend lots of time with your family at the end of the day. That's really all that matters. So happy Thanksgiving, and thanks for sharing some time with us here at the show.
Good night.